The views and opinions expressed in the following podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the producers, the affiliates, or digital platforms hosting this podcast. All content is for the purposes of education, conjecture, and at times entertainment. We promote inclusiveness and diversity. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Into the Deep with Jay Costa.
Welcome to Into the Deep. I'm Jay Costa. I'm so excited about today's guest. He's a video creator and podcaster who uses his platforms to link consciousness, metaphysics, ancient and modern wisdom to seek the congruence between science and spirituality. Today's guest is Nick Zai. Nick is the author of the book 10 Secrets of Awakening, the secrets to understanding consciousness, life transformation, and self-realization. I would describe Nick as a fellow truth seeker, and we talk about so much in this episode. We talk everything from ancient history, philosophies of antiquity, we get into some neuroscience, we talk about paradigm shifting. So strap in, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Join me as we seek light and journey into the deep with Nick Zai. Enjoy. Nick, thank you so much for joining me, man. I can't thank you enough for making the time for us today, man.
Sure, yeah. I'm excited to be here. I don't know what we're going to get into, but let's get into some stuff.
Right? Well, I know who you are. I know what you've been up to, but if you wouldn't mind sharing for our listeners and our viewers who you are and what it is you do, my friend.
Sure. So Nick Zai is who I'm currently in this life, and what I do is I just basically talk about things that I find interesting, and I'm lucky enough to make a career out of that. And those things are ancient history, ancient philosophies of antiquity, a lot of ancient texts, and esoteric kind of books and teachings that I think are lost or are lost to most people. But that's kind of the meaning of esoteric, so that's kind of a fun. But either way, I feel like knowledge that I feel like will help people to understand the nature of reality and themselves. That's what I do.
Love that. And sincerely, like, I was saying earlier, George and I absolutely love what you've been doing and what you've been contributing to just, all of the world around us, and I guess that's just an important thing to be able to state is that, I guess what got you on this trajectory? Like, where were you before this?
Mm-hmm. So I've done a lot of different things. I've done some manual labor jobs. Car detailer, I've waited tables. I'm a big guy, so I do well, 6'4", so I do well in manual labor. But that was like the jobs that I worked while I was trying to figure out exactly what I enjoyed about life. And so I guess a more formal answer to that would be I was doing kinesiology. That's what I went to school for, which is a lot of study of human movement. And I was really into the biomechanics of how our body works, because the background started as someone who was 315 pounds. And right now I'm like, I would say somewhere in the 200, like right about 200. And so I lost a lot of weight, and I was really overweight in high school. So that was what got me interested. It was like a reversal. It was like I wanted to fix that. Then I wanted to help people because I felt like I had that skill of, okay, I lost that. I know there's other people struggling with that. And then I started to figure out as I got into like internships, I did a physical therapy internship, that this really wasn't for me, because I started to notice how, while I think physical therapy is valuable for someone who's acutely injured in like a dirt bike accident or something like that, like I've had, for someone who is chronically struggling with problems with their body, I realized that a lot of it was because of the way that they perceived reality, the way that they perceived themselves. And so then I basically dove into that rabbit hole of, okay, why are they not taking the necessary steps to actually do what they know they need to do? And so that got me just deeper into the different levels of mind, because there's many different levels of mind. I think there's many different levels of bodies that we kind of communicate with. And so a lot of people were stuck in that kind of survival brainwave state. So that's why I started with books like You Are the Placebo, Dr. Joe, and started in that kind of neuroscience arena. And then I really got interested in esoteric books and kind of this deeper knowledge that I felt like there wasn't as many people talking about, because it's not like I don't think that stuff is powerful, because I still do talk about that sometimes. But I think that there needs to be more voices in kind of the deeper laws and principles, really, of reality. And that's kind of where I am now.
Well, love that. And I can align with that. I lost over 80 pounds in my life. And at 5'5", much smaller individual than yourself, but I did not carry it well, let me just say. And it took a little
Who
bit
does?
of.
Find me someone that does.
Right. It was like I was carrying a whole other version of myself with me. But again, I can align with a lot of the similarities, going through some of you know, the mental fortitude to be able to get myself to a point where I was happy, and healthy, mentally and physically. And then that journey kind of led me into everything else. So thank you so much for sharing, man. That means a lot.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So now when you say, obviously you're doing like physical therapy and got outside of that and you started discovering some of these esoteric teachings, I can't help but notice a lot of the, things that you are talking about on your platforms. You get a lot of that, like the hermetic principles, like without stating it specifically, but it just seems like they kind of gravitate to that.
Overlay.
Yes, absolutely. Am I
Are you
correct in
saying
that?
are you saying in what I shared, they just kind of are part of it, the whole sphere now?
Well, no, I feel like what it is it's part of that growing, I guess we could say, maybe if as a feeble-minded individual as I myself, I'm saying is like maybe it's just a continuation of these, or maybe a passing of the torch, or expounding upon these principles.
Yeah, I think that's a major part of what I do. And I didn't even really start with the Hermetic teachings and a lot of Hermes, which that's the origination of that. And we don't really know who Hermes was for sure. I mean, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, we can at some point, because
Right,
it's
right, right.
a whole conversation. But yeah, I think that if I had to pick, I guess I'll just say here at the beginning because it's important. If I had to pick one book that really relayed what I think some of the most important teachings are in a short format, it would probably be the book called The Kabbalion, and that's where we see the Hermetic principles. And I think people really do well with lists nowadays and things like that, and
Right.
bullet points versus like a whole book. Like, because trying to decode the Emerald Tablets, I mean, hell, one of my friends, Billy Carson, he is someone who committed a whole book to it. He has his book Compendium of the Emerald Tablets. And so he's a really interesting guy, and he understands a lot of the wisdom of them. But yeah, I think that there's a kind of, I've heard this term recently. I didn't come up with it. People are saying there's a hermetic revival, which really I think just means that there's people realizing that there are some sort of rules, you could say, of the game, or not even necessarily full rules, but some principles in which we can see patterns that kind of continually come to the surface of how human life works for most people. But I don't like to say usually rules, because well, I mean, you can break rules, and I think that you can probably go beyond some of the rules that are given, because it's just like different levels of truth. And that's one thing that I think that anyone who's trying to understand the nature of reality, they're going to find paradoxes throughout it, especially when you get into these lower levels and higher levels. And what does that even mean? And I've discovered that in the Hermetic books, and even in works like Dr. David Hawkins, who I studied a lot at the beginning with his levels of consciousness, the paradoxes of the spiritual reality, and different levels of enlightenment and things like that. I always found that really interesting.
Right on. It's funny you bring up Billy. Billy's a great guy. I love Billy as well. Great dude. And I've had him on the show as well too, and we talked a bit about it, but not like super in depth. We've talked about so many other things, but with your, I guess I would say, with your background, do you feel like some of that influenced how you may have interpreted these allegories or some of these principles, if you will, or these teachings?
Sure. I mean, it's pretty hard to get away from personal biases. I mean, you try
Yeah.
your hardest, but I mean, it's
Yeah.
like you have life experience, you relate the life experience to the principles. And that's why I think it's important to not necessarily degrade your past if you're coming into this, because it's going to give you a greater perspective. And I've tried a lot of different things in life. So for me, coming into the principles and seeing reality, yeah, of course, I'm going to have some sort of bias, but I do my best to try to see where those biases are. And I think that's part of it. Trying to see it in other people's shoes. If I'm helping them, if I'm working with them one on one, or if I'm hosting, workshops or whatever it is, because it's interesting when we go back and forth, because I'm going to interpret the same sentence way differently a lot of the times than what you might.
Right. Do you ever find that you interpret things, maybe if you revisit them, maybe 6 months, a year, or a couple of years later, do you feel like you get a different feeling or a different interpretation from them as well?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think that comes up for me with a couple different principles. For me, the the principle of polarity. I guess we'll start
Mm,
with that one. I first actually saw that in the book called The Law of One, which is what I talked about a lot at the beginning too. And I think that that one's difficult for people sometimes because I'm I'm one who's come to terms with that there is good and evil. I do think that there is I don't know about objectively, but I guess principally a a principle of, okay, there's a life-taking force and there's a life-giving force, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those aren't two ends of the same magnet. And being able to paradoxically hold that, yeah, there might be some life-taking type people out there. You can't deny that. How do we reconcile that if everything is non-dual? Because that's essentially a lot of these teachings. They end up being some sort of non-dual. There's just one. And I think the analogy of the magnet that they gave in the Law of One helps me to come back to the Kabbalion and see, okay, that's how I picture that. That's why I think electromagnetism is really important understanding than that specific concept. You know?
yeah. And it's interesting because to try and have these kinds of, you know, let me first preface that with I feel like some of the conversations that we're seeing or having today, whether it's through social media or anything like that, some of these conversations that maybe fell on a multitude of deaf ears 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Um, whether, we can get into why that is, but to be able to have these conversations now, I feel like that there's a resurgence where that information is available to more people. They can do the research themselves if they so choose. But there's an overall feeling of more acceptance and open-mindedness, open-heartedness to something where people are looking for something more than themselves. Um, why do you think, with having said that, why do you think it's challenging for people to maybe know more or less they can see something that tells them what they need to do to rectify a situation, but not take the course of action to rectify it?
Well, before I answer that, I want to actually go into why there is a
Mm,
resurgence, because I think that's really important.
thank you.
It's literally just historical. I think this is just how evolution works, especially for humans when you have technology. We have the capacity to develop, with the thumbs, to develop tools of weapons or, tools that help us. And so we can see that one of these tools is the internet. It can be used as a weapon, or it can be used as the greatest liberator of humanity, just like a sword can. That's why people love lightsabers, right? So basically, I think that it's just a consequence of information being available specifically by the internet. And if you just think about, okay, well, if in what we know of history, which is what most people know, which is usually kind of off from what it really was, for the last, like we could at least say the last couple thousand years, we didn't have access to this technology. And so the information is going to be kept in, well, the original root of the word esoteric, which is to the few people. And so if only a few people know about this, then of course it's going to be tough for humanity to evolve. But if it's more widespread, for example, I can go on and read the Kabbalion for free right now on the internet. Okay. So if that's available to everyone, I think it's just an amount of time where there's going to be this precipice where you have certain people that are in the religious system. Let's say Christianity, Western. We'll just talk about that because it's most popular right now.
Sure.
Then you have this amount of time where, okay, they're in that. Now, oh, the internet's coming along. Okay, the internet has all these different ways. Okay. Now, I think it's actually a direct result of what happens to the people that are associated with these teachings, because the problem is that before the internet you could basically call anything you wanted a cult, and then it would just be, okay, well, they're a cult because we say that they are, not because we actually know what the definition is. Because if we talk about the definition of what a cult is, I think you'd be surprised as what we could actually label a cult out there. So what we see is that actually, no, these people are happy. Not only, I don't think happiness is the only determining factor, but they seem to live lives that are more productive. This seems like this information may help people over time. That is proven again and again. And so we see a revival of these principles, because when people actually apply these principles, the truth eventually will be revealed. And the truth is that these principles actually help you in life. They actually give you some sort of understanding, which may lead to a greater sense of peace for some people. Maybe it's understanding. It's going to be different. Again, depending on our background or what we're struggling with in our life currently. But I think that's why we're seeing a revival, is that people are introduced to something different, and then given enough time, they actually apply the principles, they see that they work. And we're, in my opinion, just going to see kind of that threshold where people are leaving kind of this organized religion. I don't think it's necessarily just because it's just anti-religion. No, because they're seeing that there's a lot of truth and things that might not be um, acceptable to what Western religion might be. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. As someone who was Christian before for a long time, I grew up in a small town in Michigan. So I went to Wednesday and Sunday service. So I was around that for a while, but I started to really develop a relationship with divinity, because I do believe there is a creator still, but I think that the creator is very different than what we're told. And so that's what Hermetic principles will give us an insight into. Well, what does that look like? Well, the principle of mentalism, all is mind. So then maybe, we can take that a step further. What does that mean? Maybe there's a universal mind. Well, where do we see that concept? Well, actually, we see that concept in Neoplatonism. We see that concept actually in the Law of One as well. They talk about how there's a universal mind. So you start to see that I'm not just like a guy who's just about one frame of looking at things. So if it says it in Hermetic philosophy, that doesn't mean that it's truth. But how can we see evidence in maybe other cultures too? The Hindu philosophy kind of gives us that there's a Brahman, or there's basically one thing in existence, but they give it, and they're using different stories to tell the same story. And so as we have, again, to go back to the original point, as we go back to the internet, we have information to maybe pull from different sources to figure out what the truth is, because maybe there's not just the overall truth in one thing. Maybe we need to study Hinduism, maybe then Buddhism. And let's go back and look at Hermetic philosophy. No, let's go back to antiquity and let's look at what Plotinus had to say about Platonism and how he made that into something different. And so there's many different things. And I think that's the overall point that I'm making, that the truth is eventually going to come out given enough time, if we still have the books, because sometimes, with the burning of the Library of Alexandria, we don't have the information, but we still have little things. That's why I'm mentioning Plotinus, because that's still a little bit of the information we had from back then. Now I really would love to see what was actually burned, because I bet you there's some absolute gems in there,
Right. I'm so glad you bring that up, because, I always found it fascinating that, like, I've said this before too, I found it so odd that when when the digital form of a book was coming out, first coming out, I should say, it was called a Kindle. And I found it so odd that we would call this thing that we can read books from a Kindle. And I couldn't help but wonder about those similarities. My first thought was thinking about the Library of Alexandria and thinking about, what can be controlled about whatever books are available digitally. And you're just loving the preservation, I should say, ultimately preservation of this knowledge. So I'm so glad you brought that point up. It just led me down a whole other path. So I apologize for the tangent.
No, you're good. I mean, I'm right with you. I mean, we got to think about why are specific words being used. I think about this all the time because there's definitely truth hidden in plain sight. I've done a lot of videos about movies where there's truths in the movie, but it's just like a little bit distorted, or maybe there's a principle somewhere in here. And so I think it's important to be aware of why specific words, because it really is true. Think about it. If you have an ebook, the switch gets turned off, that thing is kindled. It's done, right? And so
God.
there's a reason why, you know, I have physical copies. I have behind me, you can't really see it because of the camera, but this is the Bhagavad Gita,
Nice.
one of my favorite translations by Yogananda.
Nice.
And so I keep physical copies for a reason, because you never know what's going to happen. And I'm not saying that I think the world's going to end tomorrow, because I'm not a doomer and I'm not a prophesizer. Those are two things that I have never really been. But I think it's really interesting, like what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And I concur. Like, having that physical form has made a difference too, because now, early days of the internet, checking things out, there were some great websites that first popped up, back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, where people were trying to preserve a lot of these sacred texts.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was always that small bit of wonder, like, okay, well, what if this was altered? What if, and then that made me think of just what has happened over time, with, whether it's scriptures and things that have been canonized and things that have been possibly perverted over time by humanity for their own agendas and things like that. So it's fascinating to, get down to the root of things because of that. Is it truth or tradition, that we're serving and that we're,
Absolutely.
carrying with us?
Right. Why do we believe what we believe? I mean, it depends on how deep you want to go, man, because we could go real deep on some different topics, because, there is some truth that you can't even get to now. There's a lot of mention of the Philosopher's Stone. And I don't know if you know the story about the Philosopher's Stone and how there was actually a resurgence, and somebody came out and said there was this anonymous source online. This was this is many years ago. And they came out and basically said, this is how you make the Philosopher's Stone. And it was in some really, it was, I don't even know, it's kind of gross when you think about it, but
you're in for a treat.
It's basically the way that you make the Philosopher's Stone, according to this. And I'm not saying it's true or it isn't. I'm just a guy who does the research. Okay, so don't get mad at me. The way that you make the Philosopher's Stone is with your own urine, according to these posts, and it was kind of this anonymous source online. Okay, so you might think, okay, buddy, sure, but the story gets very interesting because it takes a long time to make this stone. Okay, according to what the guy was saying, and so the forum posts were up. It was kind of on this anonymous site, and in the amount of time that it said to make it, people were reaching, the information became available. It said it takes this much time, and people were reaching like that end time. And suddenly, about the time where it was supposedly, a bunch of people were doing this and they were sharing, oh, this is how you do it. Supposedly, right on the precipice of when it was supposed to be done, everything got nuked. Everything. You can't even find the information anymore. And the question is was he right? Or why does it just get taken down all of a sudden? So I'm saying that to just say the basic overall lesson is not to try and, I mean, you could try and do this. I have not done it myself. I'm not the guy that's going to, promote it, but you do you. You can't even figure out how to do it anymore. Maybe you can. I don't know. The point is that there's still information we don't know. Maybe there is a Philosopher's Stone. And for those that don't know, I guess I should have said this at the beginning. Basically, the Philosopher's Stone is like this thing that humans have been searching for to give them some sort of immortality in some respect, where you don't die. And so there is kind of this theme that maybe people have figured that out. And I think it's really fascinating. But I think what we know is still just scratching the surface of what it is that's really going on here. And that's why, I have different ways that I try and help people figure out, universe is a game. That's my kind of big thing right now. Like, if the universe actually is a video game, then how would it work? And so that's the kind of way I've taken kind of looking at modern science, quantum physics, and seeing a lot of similarities between Eastern philosophies and traditions, and not only just Eastern, but many spiritual traditions. A lot of even indigenous traditions say a lot of the same things, which is very interesting. And so that's the kind of way that I've taken. Okay, how can we take this ancient stuff, link it to modern science? Because it's not just about, for me, just saying, oh, that's what they were saying, so try it out and see if it works. Well, no, it's cool that ancient philosophies say this stuff, but also, what does modern science say? And what is evidence and experiments that we're doing that kind of also give evidence to this? Because it's not just about spirituality for me, it's also about science. Because I think in the pursuit of understanding both, I think that's when we can really start to get a grasp on what's going on. Because sometimes people get into too much, they get so lost in the spirituality of it, where that, you can find, let's just say, this is great because it leads back into what we were saying earlier. I was saying there's different levels of truth. There's a truth beyond what we call symbols. Symbols are words. Words are symbols for reality. Just like if I say Ohio, right? Then that Ohio isn't actually what Ohio is. It's just a symbol for understanding this land. And so it's like, well, that's the word to understand it, but that's not really what it is. And so we can think about that for everything, your name, my name, they're kind of symbols, but they're not actual reality. And so there's a absolute truth beyond symbols. And this is what I think a lot of spiritual traditions find. So you can find that absolute truth that is beyond words that a lot of these mystics try and describe. But for me, it's not only about seeking that absolute truth. What is that experience of truth? But also, how can I understand that and hopefully try to bring that into an understandable format for people? Because just like the bodhisattvas of Buddhism, they come back and they help once they reach enlightenment. They come back in and they choose to help humanity. I feel like I'm definitely not on that level, but I feel like I'm kind of trying to follow that path to see what is this absolute experience of truth and how can I start to interpret that to modern science. And so that's what I've been doing.
I'm so glad you said that. And that's why I'm so grateful for what you are doing for individuals. I'm grateful for you finding and highlighting and putting a spotlight on the congruence between spirituality and science, because there was a point in time where it was one and the same for many great civilizations. And so for you taking that time, and I'm glad, is a perfect segue to get into Universe the Game that you've been doing on Patreon, or it's something where, like, I enjoy the fact that it's just not you talking about this stuff, but you're encouraging folks to put this into practice in their everyday lives.
Yeah. So Universe Game is an interesting one. It also became, because I'll just get into a little bit of the origins, because why not? Right. So Universe Game is something I've been doing for years. I've actually been talking about the reality is pretty similar to video games. And that started when I was younger. I played a lot of video games, and I played a lot of games that were, I was really interested in role-playing games. I was interested in MMOs, kind of the games where you had characters, really. And so I played a lot of World of Warcraft, these type games where you could actually basically focus your intent on creating a character and then experiencing a world through that character. And I started to really notice how a lot of this was actually similar to what I could see was coming out in simulation theory. Now, that's something that came from Nick Bostrom in, I think, 2002, 2003. He was the first one to kind of formalize it. I do think that there was some big theory of everything guys that may have been talking about it before he was. So he's not necessarily the first one to ever think of the simulation, but he was the first one that popularized it. And so I started to see how, okay, maybe if, wait, you're telling me that I could be in a video game, because I immediately didn't. Some people interpret simulation theory as AI, a lot of AI related stuff. But as someone who is studying spiritual things, I was like, wait, a lot of these spiritual traditions say that there's a higher self, and that the higher self is like part of you, but it's like not you right now, but it is, but it's like experiencing through you. And I'm like, well, that kind of just sounds like if I was playing a game and I was just controlling my character, but I was so ingrained in being the character that I don't even remember the rest of me. And it's like you start to see these coincidences. And then I started to see, one of my favorite books at the beginning, some people write off past life regression and these things. But for those people that are like, okay, because some of the stuff Dolores Cannon talks about, yeah, it's pretty wild. Okay. But my first episode of my podcast, Universe the Game, which is part of that, was on Journey of Souls, which is a book by Dr. Michael Newton. And I started to realize that, well, this past life regression stuff kind of sounds like if I just stopped playing a game and I was just in the soul form, and that was just another body. Because remember earlier I said there's many different bodies. So maybe I'm just like, okay, I'm letting go of that body, and then there's another body, and then I'm just playing in another level of the game. So how is it that a lot of these spiritual traditions start to sound like a lot of what I'm doing on games? And so then I, for years and years and years, I've linked up different things. And I think a lot of people write off the past life regression because they don't realize how old it is, because they think people are just making stuff up. But if you actually look at, there is some evidence, historical evidence of Plato and what's his name? He's got a theorem in math, Pythagoras. Yeah. Yep. So there's some evidence of them two really talking about this thing called the transmigration of souls, and that there is some evidence of, okay, they're actually saying a lot of the same things that past life regression people are. There's a soul, and then you choose what happens in your next life. I'm like, well, that just sounds like choosing a character. So I started to notice a lot of to basically wrap it all up. I started to notice a lot of similarities between video games and these spiritual traditions, video games, and simulation theory. And then, so now what I do is I have something on Patreon called literally just Universe the Game on Patreon, where we play the game basically by, like what you said, I give people things to do. Like I'll give you an example of what I do in the Patreon, just because why not? I have one of the activities that go along with the weeks is the first week, one of the quests, because I give people quests. And one of the quests was to, and I encourage, if you're, you didn't watch, most people probably haven't seen it, but just try this out. Go out into reality, go somewhere crowded, go into a mall, go to a restaurant, and I just want you to try on the perspective. You can take it off later. Just try it on. If you actually interpreted reality as a game, and you saw all of these other people around you as just players who came in the same way you do, who have no idea what the hell is going on, and they're just living their life, but with the perspective that they came in the same way. This important part is like, well, they are just trying to figure it out like you are. What does that do to your perception? Is that something that puts you in what state? What is the state that comes from that? And for me, what I did when I started doing this many years ago was it actually gave me a lot of compassion for other people, because it's like, wait, they don't know what's going on. And then you start looking back at, okay, well, maybe the Bible isn't all BS, because one of the most famous sayings of Jesus is forgive them for they know not what they do. And if you take that and you put that in modern day, if we're in a video game, they have no idea what they're doing in the game. And so I can forgive them because they're just trying to figure it out. And then it gives me also a sense of purpose. It's like, well, what's worth doing if we're all in a game? The game really itself, it matters to some respect, but nobody's going to remember who I am. So many people are chasing materiality of, I want this nice thing. I want people to know who I am, just to then, they don't even think about just to be forgotten in 500 years. 500 is definitely generous. You could say in 100 years, who's going to be remembered? Maybe a couple people, but that's it. And you can strive to be one of those people. Or for me, it became this thing where I started to realize, well, then what really matters? What do I want to do with my life? Well, I would probably, the only way that I can actually leave an impact is to actually change people's perception in one that is helpful to them, harmonious to other people. Because if I do that, then their perspective has changed, their life has changed, So then I'm going to go out and just watch them then help other people. And then that becomes a trickle down effect. And that is what I think is when people say evolution of consciousness, that's what it is. And I think right now we are in that precipice of it's going to change because we have that information. Not only do we have the advancements of the internet, but we also have the advancements of the experiment, shout out to all the physicists that have been willing to stick out their necks for hundreds of years. David Bohm coming out and telling us, wait, oh, you're telling me if I'm looking at reality, and this was his analogy, I'm looking at reality, because in his time there was aquariums, and he had this concept called non-locality, and he kind of popularized that. So he basically said, look at a fish in an aquarium. There's one fish, right? But if you're looking at it from this side of the tank and there's someone over here looking at it from another side, it's going to look like there's two different fish because they're moving at different angles. If we don't have TV, but if you actually just thought about there's two different perspectives, but they're looking at the same thing. And it's actually just one fish. And that was his way of telling us, well, maybe we're all just non-locally interacting with the same thing. And so then you start to say, well, okay, that's sticking your neck out back there. So it's not as though science is all corrupt, because that's what happens is that people will then in spiritual, like kind of this new age spirituality, will say, well, science is all, yeah. But no, there is some beautiful gems in there. And one of the greatest analogies I'll share with you from David Bohm that really helped me is that how can you reconcile that there's many players, right? If we're in a video game, then there's many players, but yet there seems to be non-duality as that truth again. We're coming back to it. Okay, what? How does that even make sense? Well, imagine if there's an infinite just water. There's infinite water, but yet there's whirlpools in that water. Now, would you call those whirlpools the entire part of the entire thing? Are they separate? If there's only water, if everything is water, then there's got to be some way to try to explain how a whirlpool, we can call that a whirlpool, but yet it is still water. How does that make sense? That is one of the best analogies, in my opinion, for understanding the nature of reality. We are whirlpools in the water, but all there is water. So we think that we're separate. We call ourselves whirlpools, but yet we're not really just that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, or at least I like to believe that is the closest thing to what I believe and what I feel when it comes to just the interconnectedness of everything, and just how we can talk about I, I and I, we're all one, it's just a different perspective. You experience yourself through the I, and I'm experiencing you through my I, and vice versa. But who's to say that you're not a different iteration of myself in the exact same moment, but through a different space, time, or dimension, or whatever? There's no way of saying. So that's why it's important when you talk about some of the ancient teachings to, treat each other with love and kindness, and love thy neighbor, forgive them for they know not what they do, because each of our actions ultimately affects everything around us, which then in turn affects us.
Absolutely. I mean, I wrote a book about a year ago now, 10 Secrets of Awakening.
Yeah.
And in that book, that's literally pretty close to what I said. I said, nobody can explain why we all call ourselves I. Everyone calls themselves I. Everyone refers to themselves as I. And why is that? Not only just because of the English. I mean, you can look at many cultures. Everyone's referring to themselves as the same thing. So why do we call ourselves I? Maybe because that's like basically a subconscious way of understanding that everyone is that I, everyone is that awareness. I can say that I would be panpsychist. If you're wondering how I look at reality, I do think consciousness is fundamental.
Mm.
And I think a lot of scientists can't understand that. And they refute the panpsychist view, which is basically that there is some fundamental, this is what a lot of spiritual traditions, Hinduism kind of says this in some way, Buddhism, that there's something that underlies everything. And also a lot, maybe Chinese philosophies also say this too, where they say that there's chi. You ever heard of the concept of chi?
Mhm.
And even even if we look at, I was just in on the Big Island over there in Hawaii, and they say that there's mana is what they call it, and they have some really interesting traditions over there that I discovered. But no, I didn't. They've been around. I didn't. I wasn't the first one or anything like that. That's not what I mean. I'm just I found
I know what you mean.
because I've been there, because I went there, and
Right,
people
right.
were talking about it. But yeah, basically, there's some fundamental force, and then where's the truth hidden in plain sight? I do think that Star Wars kind of nailed it with that, the Force. You know.
Yeah. It's fascinating, being at a point in time where, now, people are probably a lot more open to the idea of, well, just like self-authoring our lives, right? Even just something like that, being able to, create our own destiny or like determine mindset, and saying like, well, mindset is everything, mind over matter, all the adages that we've heard through childhood, if you put your mind to anything, you can accomplish it, things like that, um, it's fascinating to be at this point now in coming into life and realizing like just the truth behind that, or just seeing, I guess, the evidence for myself through my own experiences when I've implemented that.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Mm-hmm. And so that's why, like, we scratched the surface earlier when we talked about universe, the game. We talked about putting those things into motion, right? And so now, like you said, you've been doing this for a little while now, but like wanting to do something, and I appreciate you on a lot of levels that you didn't just want to do something that was the same old shtick that other people have done. It's not some, you wanted something unique. You put it out there, you accepted feedback, which, that's a huge thing for anybody. Like, let's take the feedback and like work on something. And you did, and you put it into work. Would you mind sharing some ideas that maybe you had early on before coming to this, to what you're now putting into motion?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to, I was going to do University Game Academy, and then it was a kind of a school basis. And I did that because there's kind of this part of me that wants to teach, but I also know that I'm not just here to teach, because I've done skits. And I actually like doing skits. And it's fun. It actually is really enjoyable. So I've actually been trying to figure out a way to relay truth that's not direct as much. And so, yeah, people gave me some feedback on that. I was like, oh, this is the idea. And then I went back to the drawing board, because people were like, well, we don't want to learn in the traditional way. And there are a lot of people who do university type things. And so then I just kind of went back and kind of sat with myself. And I was actually alone on the Big Island then. So there's a lot of time for me to just kind of reflect. And then I kind of realized I had this beautiful concept for my podcast called University Game. And I wanted to give people a way to actually just dive into different aspects in a way where they could continually be a part of a community. Because here's the thing, there's not how do I put it, there's not a shortage of information on the internet. I'm sure you could probably find somewhere where someone is talking about parts of this, but I wanted to bring it all into one spot. And it is tough because you don't know if it's going to work. You don't know how people are going to receive that. Getting out there on the forefront, it's difficult sometimes, because you're like, University Game, what do you guys think? Let's do it. And it was actually a great response, because I do think people are not looking for the same old stuff anymore. They want a new way to see, kind of maybe, because we can't get away from truth. We still want to relate truth. And sometimes truth can be boring to some people, or so we got to find a way to relate it, and maybe in an interesting way. And so, I still respect, some philosophers that have come before me that have led me to this, and some credit would be due to people like Alan Watts, who took these Eastern traditions but way before I did, and he found that they were calling it a dream. They're calling reality a dream. And then he popularized that. And if I was going to say, okay, if reality is not a game, I was wrong, which I would admit. If I did come to the conclusion I was wrong, I'd say shit. You know what? I were wrong. But I do think that it being a dream is very, very close to the same thing. It's like saying the same concept, but just in a different way. I have one of my friends, Indigo Bruno, some people might know him as online. He and me were talking about how a lot of the times the way the culture interprets reality is a direct response to what is popular in the culture and what are the symbols that people can use to understand it. And so that's why I think people might think that it's boring sometimes to look back at Eastern traditions, because they're using very simple analogies. Like, look at the moon, look at the river, look how this flows through your body in this way. And it's just like very simple. And people are like, So then I started to see how there is truth here. And to basically summarize our conversation with Bruno is very big on this. There is an elephant that we're all trying to touch and to feel and try to understand, but we're all blind. And we're all trying on different sides of the elephant, trying to say what it is. And so if you're looking at reality as a dream, just like Inception in a way, then that could definitely be one part of the elephant. And then if it's a me over here, looking at it from my perspective, this is probably one part of the elephant too. But will we ever know what it is? Or maybe can we ever understand it by trying to symbolically understand it? That I'm not even sure of. But I think that it's definitely an interesting one, and my pursuit to try and figure out getting as close as I can to actual reality, if possible.
Right on. And I love that too, especially the correlations between talking about like simulation theory and thinking about the fact that, like, even in video games, there are rules, there are laws, there are mathematically programmed things, if and then. And it's similar to this plane of existence that, quantum physics has been showing us now, that if and then, and we have this cause and effect action that's happening in life.
100%. I mean, I could just go on a tangent with all the different quantum physics with it. I mean, do you want to do that? Because I can.
Do it. Let's go. Let's go.
Okay. So first things first, the double slit experiment is very interesting because it basically is showing us that when you're looking and observing things, they're particles, but when you're not, they're waves. Now there's this whole argument that, well, it doesn't have to be a human, it can be a recorder observing it. But I still, every time people say that to me, I still bring up, well, with Schrodinger's cat, which is another kind of equation that we came across, that we don't know until we actually directly observe it, what reality it's in. So if Schrodinger's cat is a thing, then that means that basically I don't know what state the cat is in, for that example, until I directly observe the cat. Is it alive or is it dead in the box? I don't know. And so that's also the case for the double slit experiment. It's like, I don't know what the recording says until I observe it. And maybe that's even also implying that somehow if the game is intelligent enough, it would be able to tell that we have chosen the path that is going to observe that wave or particle, however you want to say. Really, it's both, right? Superposition, in a sense. That's another concept. It's basically saying the same thing, that we don't know what position it's in until we directly observe it. So if you start thinking about a lot of these quantum physics principles, you start to see that this would be really a really good way for the simulation or for the game to save computing power. Because then the argument is, why would it do that? Well, if it's a simulation that was developed, going on another tangent about who developed it, that's a different one. But if they didn't have infinite computing power, because I don't think that we are in what I would call base reality, or I don't even think the reality above us or the reality that we come from, I don't think that's base reality either. So if it's not, then there would be some need of computing power unless they figured out a way to develop an infinite amount, which is not something that I think that they have done. And I don't think that. I mean, it is possible to develop technologies. There's a lot of people coming out saying that there is anti-gravity and these things. I'm interested in that stuff. But basically, if we think about, okay, let's bring it back to the principles. As above, so below. One of the principles of Hermeticism, right? That how it works in higher realms, what people refer to as like higher realms, is basically the realm we come from, is what I would describe it as, is how it works here. So then if in our reality, we are limited to a certain amount of computational power in order to generate simulations, then it would also be the case for the reality above us. So then that would make sense that if when we don't look at things, it's still a wave, because if it doesn't have to, basically think about it in a video game term, if it doesn't have to render, which is a concept that is used in video games right now, that it's just pixels and it's not rendered. Like if you're playing GTA and there's something way across the map, it's not fully rendered, right? Or you're playing Skyrim or anything really. So each person is kind of rendering their perspective through wave particle duality by what's around them. And it still does work for blind people, because if the video game is smart enough, it's going to be able to tell what that person would be able to actually physically touch at that point. It might not actually render physically, because there is no sense for it to render physically for a blind person, but it would still render environmentally in a certain radius. And that would probably be more not just touching radius, but it would also be hearing radius, where they can hear. And I do think that there is different senses beyond, this is what some people might call third eye, pineal gland. I think there are different senses that maybe certain people can activate that is beyond sight, because there's some brilliant people that can paint out there that have never been able to see, and it looks very much like it's physical reality. How do you explain that? Well, there's probably an extrasensory sight that we can't describe that's beyond physical. So that would also imply if blind people that have never been able to see anything can paint a flower and it looks really just exactly like a flower, yeah, they could feel it and do all that. But I think there's also another explanation beyond that, is that there's probably other bodies that maybe they can tap into. Like typically, if you watch movies, like, even though it's an animated movie, you watch movies like Soul, they kind of show that there's alternate layers. And even in Doctor Strange, there's alternate layers. There's an astral layer, right? So how is he able to see in the astral layer? Everything is a little bit different, but he can still kind of see. If he doesn't have physical eyes, how can he see? Well, that also is implying that there's some sort of way to perceive that's outside the boundary of what we call physical. And so, those are some principles that kind of imply Hermeticism and simulation theory, and also quantum physics, to start people off.
Right on. I love the analogy used early on in the conversation about, like, creating a character, especially for like an MMO. Like if you're creating a character, right, and this character dies, just for the sake of conjecture, we're creating another character from scratch after we've already had this experience with this other character where we, went down all these different adventures and experiences. Now we're creating a new character, and we're making alterations based on the experience with the previous character, and so on and so on and so on. At least that was the interpretation that I got from what you were saying.
100%. You want to know some evidence of that? Is actually, there's this really weird thing that happens is all these people that we know that are so, like, kind of more famous people, you can actually look back in history and see their face back in the day. How is that possible? How did these people look like people that are around thousands of years ago? What? Well, a good way to explain that would be reincarnation, first of all, and then also on top of reincarnation, being able to choose your body, and then also some sort of physicalness is applied to that character. Like you might, like for example, if I have the next body after this one, if I choose to come back here, which is another story.
Be cautious.
Right. So if that is, then maybe the face is overlaid onto that character, like you are creating that face, and maybe there's also other things that are overlaid, which is going into another piece of evidence for this theory, which is that there are kids that are born with birthmarks in a lot of Eastern cultures. And there's thousands and thousands of kids documented by Ian Stevenson. And there's also people continuing his work at the University of Virginia where these kids have birthmarks or scars or something from they don't know where. But then these kids are also saying that, oh, I was actually off in a past life and I got shot right here, or something like that, or I got a neck slit right here, or a mark on their face. And there's no way to explain this other than that they reincarnated and that they have some sort of piece of that previous incarnation physical on their body. And it's not just about them saying that I was off here. No, these kids were actually able to find their bodies that nobody else was able to find. They could go to places, be like in this, next to this ravine right here, maybe, and wait. There's actually a body there. Like, how is that possible? Like, stuff like that really started to show me that, okay, I think this reincarnation thing is really real. And the reincarnation thing was one of the first things that really made me stop when it came to Christianity and say, wait, especially these studies in the University of Virginia, wait, how is this possible? If we can give scientific evidence, I think that's why you see people like Dr. Joe that are like demystifying the mystical. Why is that so well received? Because people don't just want another belief system. That's why I stop and I try to stay away from like just trying to say this is the way that it is now, and just throw away everything else that you believe with no evidence. Which is what a lot of spiritual people do, especially on Instagram, is that they're just like, this is the truth because I say so. And it's like, but what's the evidence of that? Right. And so that's what I really try to do with my work, is like, I'm giving so many pieces of evidence because I'm not just going to cognitively say I'm traumatized from Christianity, put me in something else. This is my truth now. I want to actually understand what are the principles that lead to the what people call proof or the evidence that this could be true. And so that's why many books, many different teachings, that's why I think it's important to not just learn from one person. That's what I try to do with Universe of Game on my podcast and also on Patreon, which is I go into all the evidence in many things so that you can decide yourself, because I don't need to decide for you. I just want to give you the evidence. And you say, hey, it's up to you. Because I don't think some people, it's weird how they present information because they think that people need to be cradled and coddled into like one system. And it's like, well, this is it. But I'm like, no, you're intelligent enough to decide for yourself. And I also want people to take the next step, because I don't want people just to believe me or even you. I want people to actually go out, do the research. That's why I'm naming books. That's why I'm naming the actual studies. I'm not just saying there was a study back in the day. No, it's actually University of Virginia. Go look it up, because when people have the information, I really do think, even though it's kind of cliche, knowledge is power. There is a sense that a lot of power does come from knowledge, 100%.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that and align with it and love that. So it's another reason why, for George and I to start the podcast was for that reason, just to bring people together, that there's knowledges, it's plural, find your truth, and hey, listen to everyone's perspective. And, there's something to be learned each and every day. I don't have the answers. If I had the answers, I don't think I'd be here.
I don't have all the answers. I think I might have some sort of idea that maybe this is quite potentially a possibility. It might exist. This might be how things work. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what kind of keeps me going, is I just keep seeing more evidence. And I think over time, we're going to see, if you look at Unreal Engine, even looking at Unreal Engine right now, because if you go back to Nick Bostrom and simulation theory, one of the biggest pieces of things that he talks about is, as simulations become indistinguishable from our reality, then that's one of the big pieces of evidence, basically, that we could be in a simulation. Go look at Unreal Engine 9, I think what it is. I've done videos where I've just green screened it behind me, and I'm just like, look, this looks pretty real. So this is, I can't, you just look.
Right. I'll point to it. I'll
Right.
put some breadcrumbs out. And that's what I feel like a lot of, spiritual teachers or any of those that, some might call enlightened, whatever, insert whatever adjective you want. But I feel like it's all a trail of breadcrumbs. And, we're all just leading each other home. Like Ram Dass said, I firmly believe that. And it's like, if we're all one and we're all in this experience to try and learn something, if we decided to come back here, because I can align with the reincarnation and I can think about, past life. For a lot of people, when they started hearing about past life regression, I think a lot of people were very skeptical of it based on a lot of the dogmatic belief systems that have been in existence for a little bit of time, for several generations. So I can understand there's some hesitation to it, but I love the fact that you bring up, past lives and talk about even just something as simple as look up these faces of people who we see as, celebrities and whatnot. Like, what is it about it? And I don't know, that drives me to want to find out more. And it sounds like that's what, part of that's driving you, man.
I'm just looking for evidence. That's all I'm doing. And I just want to say, I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be part of that. I don't know. And I also want to say that a part of that is also that I don't think that just because we recognize their faces, that they're on a higher level or anything like that. That's 100% not what I mean. I actually think that some people start to pedestal this. And if people only knew what these people were like behind the scenes, I'm not saying all of them, but there's some real sketch stuff. So don't put people on a pedestal that we can see in past history. But I do think that it'd be interesting, take a look for yourself. Like, look at your face and get yourself into a condition, because here's the thing, if I'm 315 pounds again, I'm not going to be able to recognize my face. I'm going to look like all the fat people from the past. So get yourself into a condition where you could see your face, like truly see what the structure is.
Right.
And then maybe look, you might be surprised. But the problem with that is that I've seen this time and time again, whether it's in one-on-ones or workshops or things. People will come in, I'll tell them this information, and they're like, well, I must have been a king. That king is me, and I'm still that king now. So, what's up? Where are my people at? Right, and then they tunnel vision on that past life in that identity, and they forget that they are not that anymore. That was just one character, and you can take the lessons of that character and apply them to life. But then people sometimes identify, which is okay. You want to talk about, I think, problems with information? This is probably the biggest problem, is that it's not even just universe of game, because I really try to hammer this home so people aren't, in my community, this isn't an issue, but in the spiritual community, it absolutely is an issue. People think that they are this extra dimensional being, and they might have, I'm not denying that, but they are so identified as this extra dimensional being who was from this place, or the Pleiades, or they're from here, and they're from Sirius, and they're this galactic ascended master, and they come in, and I almost feel like that's another, they get so ingrained into it, then it becomes another religion. And then they become so lost into that they don't see that they came here to be here now. And that there is some, here's the part about spirituality where you've got to be real careful. This is a real careful part, because you can't deny subjective experience fully. You can't. Because if you're denying a lot of the spiritual experience, if you do, but you also got to be real careful that your ego can be real tricky, and it can absolutely just make things up. And that's why I think it's tough with past life regression and just what you were before you came here with no physical evidence. That's why I think if you look in history and you find it, that's something different, versus it sounds cool to not be from here, because who the hell would want to be from here? Let's just say what it is. Because who wants to take responsibility for all the atrocities of our culture? Nobody does. So hell, I want to be from Pleiades too, because shit, that sounds nice to
Way better
to
than
just
here.
come, right, to be an ascended master from wherever, because then you feel like you have this one up, this ego craftsmanship. And so that's why when people ask me, well, do you think you're from here or there? I'm like, I have no idea. And I generally don't think about it because it's not important to me what I was. And some people get empowered by that information. And to them, okay, I'm not trying to deny that. But for me, it's not important to this life. What's important is what is happening right now in my life. And if I have lessons from the past that I feel like I can learn, great. But people, it seems in the spiritual community, try to find any, and this is just a human trait in general, will try to find a way to be better than someone else, to have more knowledge than someone else, whether it's religions of the past. I mean, how many people have died over thousands of years because their culture is correct, they're right, somebody else is wrong. And I think that hopefully we don't get too lost in the spiritual community into what we are and what other people aren't, and we just focus on, well, I'm human now, these people are human now, what can we do together to create a more harmonious civilization, not trying to be better than, because I used to be. Now, what are you now? What is happening now? And how can you benefit others right now? Because this is one thing too, people forget. They forget that, kind of the spiritual awakening culture, or this awakening culture, it's not just about you. Because people will say, oh, well, I'm here doing these things because I got to achieve this state. And people forget the reason. For me, or maybe they don't understand the reason. For me, it's not about me. I don't know about you, but I don't do this for me.
Same.
I could absolutely get on friggin' TikTok and talk about drama all day and get all that. And I think that'd be the easy road. And I commend you as well for not taking that, because there's absolutely easier ways to generate this or that. But this has meaning. And so to bring it back, it's like, well, what meaning does your life have? And I don't think happiness is intrinsically enough meaning to a life to give it a fully sustainable, fulfilling life. For me, maybe it is for some people. And I want there to be some sort of reason that I did this, that I can look back on, even if I talked about this on another podcast, even if I had a friend on who was talking about like the African Dogon tribes and how they are like the originators a lot of times of civilization, and they're like the best kept knowledge is from the African traditions. And I was talking about how sometimes people mock that information, and I think that if we're talking about if the universe is a game, hey, maybe part of the game is for you to get mocked. Maybe that's how the game is designed. You're trying to avoid people talking crap about you. You're trying to avoid the people who are just judging you. But that's the point of the game, partly. If you didn't have the haters, what would be happening in this game? I mean, people want to move towards a utopia, but I think if you think about game design, let's think about like actually if you were designing a game like this, like we're in, a really interesting level, it wouldn't really probably be the most interesting if it was just a utopia, if it was just this new earth that everyone wants to move towards, which that's another topic. But it's actually the most interesting part, probably the most exciting part for you as a player would be to go where people don't understand, to go where people are going to mock you and try to help people and try to find the truth, because that's where the excitement is. That's where the adventure is. So people a lot of times will say, well, I wish it wasn't like this. But then the alternative to that would be, yeah, it would be nice at times. And I absolutely feel that way, to just have it where people got along and, we figured out the truth. It would be nice for a certain period of time. But think about if you had that for 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000. What would you want to do? Would you want to go back? Would you want to create a game that was more interesting? 1,000,000,000 years. Okay. If that's not enough, trillions. Think about infinite. Jeez. Would you eventually create a world where there is some sort of contrast, where there is this illusion of good and evil? Or would you just keep it harmonious love and unity forever and ever? And maybe there are universes out there where that is the case. Maybe that is, this is kind of esoteric, but part of the law of one, there was a question that was asked, why did you create evil? Why is there evil? And the answer is that there actually wasn't evil in the universe for billions of years, but the universe, the universal mind, wanted to experience itself in all aspects of itself. So eventually, there was the creation of a life-taking force that was incarnate to experience what that would be like. And I just can't be that arrogant enough to say that I would not choose eventually to have contrast. That's just what it is. So people wonder, why is it like that? That is the reason.
Gosh, I love that. It makes me wonder if that's why we're almost predisposed as humans to indulge in drama.
Yes.
And just this, like you said, I mean, I can totally get behind that. Like, if it was just completely utopian and peaceful for however long, at some point in time, whatever created it or whoever created it at some point in time, like you said, to the full complete nature of everything, right? So like just taking the definition of perfection, right? It's complete, it's whole without flaw. Well, it's not complete or whole if it doesn't have flaws. So paradoxically, perfection can't exist without that flaw. So does that in essence create perfection as having flaws? But then it's opposed to what the definition is.
The Yuga cycles.
Oh, nice. Heck yes.
If you look at the cycles of the Yuga cycles, which is a ancient way that they interpreted that actually the universe works in cycles. And if what were we just talking about? We were literally just talking about how there would probably be a cycle then where you decided it would make the most sense if you were going to create a game. It's like, well, this is actually kind of wild to think about. But if you were making a game and you were in Utopia, you were in what we consider to be complete unity, and then you were like, okay, well, I actually don't want to be I want to experience the contrast. Let's say you chose that. Then you would probably also be like, well, I don't want to never experience Utopia. And it would also kind of be cool to experience Utopia as that incarnated being versus as a what you could call a god or creator. And so then you would probably have a cycle that is where you actually do get to experience the beauty of, for let's just say for humans, let's say the beauty of humanity eventually for a while. And that's what the Yuga cycles say. That there's the Bronze Age, there's a Golden Age, and there's different ages for it's a long period, by the way, that you have basically what you can think of as like the pivotal humans understand truth. We live in a utopia, yada yada. Okay. Then you have the complete opposite of that. And then it kind of builds up, because that would make the most sense, right? If you're making cycles, is you would have the cycles be a build where you have complete enlightenment of some sort or very much a utopia, and then it just complete darkness, or like this sense of you lose it. And then you kind of move back into the dark ages, and you kind of go back. And if you look at the diagram, you'll see that like that's kind of what happens. You go through the different ages to eventually reach it, just like if you were playing a video game and you had different expansions. And so there would be an expansion where it sucks. It would probably suck a lot. But what would you do? You probably would start off the players there. So there's a whole conversation about where we're at in the cycle. I don't even really want to get into it because there's many different interpretations. And there's people that are saying, oh, we're here, we're there, we're there.
Right.
I think very speculatory. I think we're moving we're moving up. I'll just say that. I think we're not in the dark fully.
We're not in Kali Yuga.
Correct. Right. I think we're in the stages where we're moving towards truth. And that's maybe another reason as to why you ask, why is the time now? Maybe it might be cyclical. Time might be cyclical in that way.
I love that. Yeah, before our little pause there, I had mentioned about just like perfection and the idea of perfection, and by definition, which led you to have that spark of inspiration right before we had to go. But and so I love that you got into that. Like, you're right. Like that, I guess that comparison to like, an expansion pack that was like so well done. Like when you think about it like that, of course you would start the avatar right there. You would start there.
And then, that's why Dr. Michael Newton says that a lot of souls that have incarnated on in the past have incarnated are new souls. People wonder, why do people do all this NPC type behavior? And then the question is are there NPCs? Are there not?
Right.
That conversation is a whole one too. But I think that you don't necessarily have to write everyone off as NPCs. You could actually just say they've never done it before. Maybe some people have. Maybe that's why they're more intuitive to truth. I do think that there's a level to this game where you get to keep something from the last incarnation. And so maybe that might be some people call it the veil, right? The veil forgetting. Sometimes called that in esoteric traditions too. So if there is a veil, it would also make sense that if you kind of pierce through that veil, if you kind of saw through the truth, that might unlock that, and it's kind of easier for you to do it. It's like you're developing a skill. So if you have specializations as a soul, maybe, then if you saw the truth, then maybe in your next life it's going to be easier for you to see through the truth, to the truth. And if we took a Hindu perspective on that and a Buddhist perspective, what you do in this life does determine what your circumstances are in your next life.
Mm-hmm.
So a determining factor on how would that work then is then the question. Would it be like a physical way for you to see through it? There might be some sort of soul remembering that's a part of that, but I think also a part of that would be the circumstances of your next life would make it easier for you to find truth because of your karma from your past life. So it's like, well, how do I find truth easier? Well, you are given circumstances to be kind of shown that sooner because you've chosen in your other life, in your past life, to then do things that progress you quicker. So there's a whole karmic action thing that we haven't even really talked about either to it.
Well, yeah, I'd love to talk about that, karmatic cycles and like anything else, that you want to delve into. I'm in.
Sure. So karma is an interesting word. I think that the clearest interpretation of the word karma is simply action. And if it's simply action, that means you're always generating it, no matter what you do. So if you're moving in some way, which you can't not move because everything is an action, because even if you say, I'm not going to take any action, that's still an action. Inaction is still technically an action. So karma would be basically this process in which I don't have to get back at people. I don't need to do eye for an eye anymore. Because if you understand the laws of the universe, if that is one of the principles, then the universe itself is kind of algorithmically determining, also maybe not, it might be part algorithmic, just like our world, as above, so below. If there is an algorithm that does determine it partly, I do think there is also some sort of choice in that. And an easy analogy to understand that would be if I'm scrolling on social media, yeah, the algorithm is kind of like feeding me stuff, but it also is determined on what I'm paying attention to or what actions I'm taking on that platform. That would also make sense that that's how our reality works. If I'm paying attention and I'm acting in this certain way, then the algorithm is going to continually show me that.
Right.
And that's just what people call manifestation.
Exactly.
And so if that's the case, then I do think another aspect to mention with karma is that you can have karmic things in action from previous lives and also karmic things in action from a kind of life selection standpoint. You might select a character that karmically has to go through this at some point. And so then you kind of choose that because maybe you didn't know in your past life. I'm sure there's many karmic consequences I've went through and you've went through too. Just as like it's part of the learning process. That's why I don't see it as a bad thing, because if you don't know what's going on, then it's going to help you in some respects either way. Because if the ultimate goal, we got to think about what is the goal? The ultimate goal is to eventually get people to this enlightened state in general, or a state of unity, let's say, to put it simply. Then if they want to feel love this thing, then the only way to teach people that don't want to learn through direct teachings, because if I give you this information and you do nothing with it, and then you continue on with let's just say it as negative karmic actions, which would be life-taking in some respect in this life, then that suffering will help people to change eventually, to eventually realize the truth. And that's why I think suffering, a lot of times, and going through things that are not optimal will eventually lead us to truth. And it is the mechanism by which we learn indirectly to find our way back. And a great example is actually my dad. No matter how many times I tell my dad, hey, man, you should probably stop eating the way you're eating. It's probably not helping you. He just had a stroke, and he had a stroke. He's okay.
Okay. All right.
But it was a kind of like a mini stroke. It was like he just had his body went half numb. And it sucks because you're watching someone destroy themselves. But at the same time, I understand that I don't want to cause myself to suffer because of what they're choosing. So I have to respect their free will. And, I ask him, after he figures out what's wrong, how's your diet going? And he says, shit. And so then I love the guy, but I still understand that the only way for him to learn, he's like, yeah, I'm still kind of eating crappy, but I understand that because this event happened, it was kind of like a warning sign to me that if I don't fix my life, if I don't fix my diet, I'm probably not going to be here very long. And so even though he kind of, I would say sorrow ate, he kind of ate out of grievingness, he still understood that through this event that seemed negative, it was a wake-up call that he needed to change. And I think he will change. And so whether or not he does, that event, that catalyst is still there for him to kind of say, hey, you need to change because you're not going to be able to experience your grandson graduating high school if you don't, and that's what you want. And so, that's kind of a casual example, but there are many other examples of things that may happen to us that are big life changes. And why did it happen? Maybe me gaining so much weight and choosing that actually helps me in my future to understand the importance of health and how I can kind of led me along this path. Would I be here if I was never overweight? I don't know. And so I choose to see those things as benefits, because if I don't, what is that going to do for me? At the end of the day, it could just be all a bunch of hoopla. But what I'm practical in the sense of what value does taking this perspective give to me? Well, it actually empowers me to see, well, if the things that happened in my past, well, I'm not going to spend a ton of time understanding, what is the exact reason, yada, yada. Because I think sometimes you can get lost in the mind games of that. So if you just bring yourself to the present and be like, that was here for me. There is something in there for me. Okay. Well, what is that? Boom. You take that, apply that to your life, and then that's how we evolve. But it's always a choice. And I think that it's beautiful that we have a choice, because I wouldn't want to live in a universe where everything is, I don't believe in the non-free will argument to some respect. Some people do. Some people think there is free will. Some people think there isn't. But I think the essence of free will is to have the essence of why do people choose things that are not optimal for themselves. Now, whether that's all predetermined, whether it's more of a movie, I don't know. I really see a lot of game aspects in it. So that's what I think.
I love what you've outlined. And I can concur with even still keeping with the game.
Sure.
Idea, thinking of it as a game, there's still and if we want to tie it back to principles, we think about cause and effect. So we can still have cause and effect on our journey, even if everything is predetermined to an extent. Like you said, if there's free will involved, which I agree, I think there is also free will, my belief, that we do have choices that we make, which then creates that cause and effect, and so on and so forth. So first and foremost, I think most importantly, before my babble, I hope your dad does well.
People want to hear what you want to say. You don't got to say babble.
I know. Well,
people love you. That's why they listen to your podcast. Come on.
Well, I meant,
you got great stuff.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. It means a lot to me. But I guess what I was trying to say is most importantly, I hope your father does really, really well. And I wish him the best, sincerely. So
thank you.
But yeah, I experienced some stuff similar with my mom in, just different life choices. And, she was a smoker for almost her entire life.
So was my dad.
Gosh, yeah. And then she was diagnosed with COPD and and then she had to be on oxygen. She stopped smoking, and then, it was the cause and effect. And, from the point they had put her on oxygen to when she unfortunately passed, 2 years ago, it was hard because, I can sit there as someone who loves her and I can try and tell her until I'm blue in the face, hey, try this, try that. But I think she realized, but it was, some would say it was too late because she was, relatively young in my opinion, but it's so hard because, like you said, to all you can do as someone who loves your parent and try and give them advice. I still make mistakes and I'll always continue to make mistakes. And the goal is to learn from them, and so even through that suffering, whether it was her learning through her suffering and then my suffering that I'm learning from through being without her, I have to, I don't have to, I'm choosing to take that and learn from it and apply these different experiences, emotional experiences, psychological experiences, and push them forward. And what I appreciate sincerely about you is that you're not taking this like high road of narcissism with your life experiences. I appreciate about you what you're doing is you actually want to, when you say you want to be at the forefront of change, I believe you because it's inherent. It's part of who you are, and you've chosen to do that. And I think for no other reason than other just loving, caring, selfless reasons. So from this being to yours, or if we are the same, thank you sincerely.
Yeah, man. So first off, I just want to say sorry for your loss on your mother. I know that must be tough for you to go through. And I think that sometimes people, if they feel like they want to make a big impact, they're like, well, that's egotistical. And I don't think that's true. I think that there's definitely an aspect of like, if you just want to genuinely help as many people as you possibly can, that is something that comes from the heart. It's like, I just want to, if I feel like I'm really have something that can really help people, if you just want to do that with as many people as possible, that's different from, I want to impact this many people so that everybody knows who I am and I get recognized everywhere I go. So there can be a beautiful essence and foundation to your life if you're just like, man, I just want to share this gift with the world. And so that first, but also I wanted to go back to something you said. You said you're always going to make mistakes. I feel like one big thing that seeing the universe as a game and these things that we've been talking about, one of the principles that helps me is to really understand that, okay, this actually goes into human design too. If you know about human design, that whole system, people that don't know, there's actually a system called human design, literally. And this is kind of a nuanced topic, but in that system, I'm a 3-5 manifesting generator. And I find that if we're talking about systems that describe reality, I think human design is much more accurate than I've seen. Not to dog on them because I think they still have value, but like numerology and astrology are okay, but human design I feel like is on another level. So, and I only say that because I've been experimenting with it for years, not just because I kind of found it and it kind of sounds cool when I read about it on the internet. My partner is a human design expert, so maybe I am biased to a certain extent, but I actually test the principles in real life and I see them. So one of the things about people with my so-called chart is that I'm meant to trial and error things. I'm meant to experiment with life. And what that really helped me to understand was that and taking that with the game, if it's all a game, if we come in here with no memory and we don't have the answers, we don't. And there's this ego mechanism that's just trying to survive that is consistently giving us Siri-like recommendations. Like it literally is like a Siri in your brain and saying, hey, you should do this. And if sometimes we fall to that, and not in a bad way, but we just like, okay, sure. And we trust that. And sometimes it might not lead us in the direction that we feel like is optimal. If we see that as a mistake, I feel like it's really not seeing the entire picture of the game. Because if the nature of the design of it is to not know the answer, then can there be a mistake? If we have a whole arcing perspective of like, yeah, this is absolutely the truth, there's nothing trying to manipulate me, I just chose that because I wanted to. Okay, that's something different. But I feel like as a human, having the humility to just understand that this is kind of all an experiment. This is kind of all like part of playing the game. So if you can see that maybe these things that you went through, you're going to keep experimenting and you might not choose the most harmonious, the most unifying thing always, but that's kind of why you're here, to also kind of experience the fullness of, maybe I want to, go out and try this or do this thing. Shit, go do that, and don't guilt yourself for it. I am, one thing with University Game in general is that I really want to relate that, to me, I am not the type of guy that's going to tell you that you need to get to a certain level and that is the only point of the game. That is not my philosophy at all. I actually think that part of what I talk about is to understand that you can actually enjoy the game, and you can do things in a balanced way where you're allowing yourself to maybe enjoy the occasional whatever the thing you actually enjoy is, whether that's a substance, whether that's an experience, going out and doing things. It doesn't have to be perfection. And I think people sometimes in the spiritual community try to seek perfection. I'm more spiritual, I'm more this because I do this more, because I meditate more, and then I'm on this pedestal compared to other people. But I think part of this game, we are meant to enjoy it. And I think that we kind of come here, they kind of explored this in the movie Soul. I'll mention it again. Even though it is, again, a kid's movie, it's really kind of a truth that they really explored this concept that the soul that hadn't incarnated comes in and gets in a body and then tastes food for the first time. And they're just like, holy shit. I'm coming here just to eat the food. And I think that, hey, there might be some of that. There are experiences you can't get other places. So sometimes let yourself eat the food that might not be optimal just for the enjoyment of it. I don't say rob yourself of all the things that are pleasure all the time because you think that you need to be on this level. Now, some people might feel like, I'm at a point in my life where I get more satisfaction out of not doing any of that. That is what brings me fulfillment. That's what brings me a sense of joy. And I'm the most happy when I'm not doing those things. Then there might be some people that are like, well, I kind of like to still enjoy the fullness of the human experience. And I want to do this. I'm at this point in my life where I can balance it. Now, I think the problem becomes is that when we don't accept that some people are going to be kind of optimalists where they completely don't want any of it and they get that kind of satisfaction out of not doing it, and we say, no, you should just enjoy it. Or if the other people are like, well, you should just not do that because you'd be happier if you didn't. You need to optimize everything. So taking a look at yourself and just saying, this is what I want out of my life, and that's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. And maybe there'll be a point in my life where I'm like, you know what? I kind of want to see what my body's capable of. That's kind of where I'm kind of moving more into that perspective right now. I enjoy life, but I also am like, I kind of want to see what potential my body has. I think it was Socrates that said, I could be wrong on this, but one of the ancient philosophers that said, a man has never lived if he's never seen what his body is truly capable of. And I think that is very interesting. And I'm not talking about looks. I'm talking about really reaching the human potential.
Right.
I think there is a time period where maybe for some months I might seek optimization. Sometimes I might be like, okay, let me just enjoy. So I think really what it comes back to is the basis of, we'll go back to Star Wars again. Why not? George Lucas actually said that the basis of the Sith and Jedi, the Sith are based on pleasure and the Jedi are based on joy. And there's a big difference between the two, because if you continually seek pleasure, there's just going to be a threshold of pleasure. It just keeps going up. You need more, and you're never really going to get that true, everlasting, kind of like sustainable joy. And people don't look for that joy because it's not as high as the pleasure. Sometimes the pleasure might be, oh, this is great, and then it sucks. And so I think figuring out how can I experience joy, but and kind of like you can still enjoy the pleasure things every once in a while, and finding, okay, you know what, my fam's going out for someone's birthday, I can have this, the fries. I'll allow myself to eat the fries, not being so strict that you can't enjoy the little things.
Right.
So kind of finding that balance between enjoying things but not getting so lost that you're just dopamine chasing.
Right on. I think it's great because we go a little full circle there with the micro and macrocosm of like, what if all of creation decided, like, I need to insert some evil, I need to insert something that's chaotic or something, however, to change it so it's not this utopian thing because it's so boring. I guess we do that on this level as well too, where we're, like you said, there's that balance. And I think that's the key, is that balance of, you know, that pleasure, the joy, but then also knowing the difference and being able to identify the joy, being able to identify those things, because if it was just utopian, we wouldn't know the difference.
Yeah, I mean, some people even get mathematical about it. I have friends who are like, you know what, I'm 90% of the time I'm gonna be enjoying. 10% of the time, I'm just gonna be enjoying parts of life. I'm gonna take the time to just sit and relax. And it's kind of paradoxical because some things people take as pleasure can actually be joy. Like somebody might say, "Well, I'm gonna go sit on a beach." And what's your interpretation of that? Is that pleasure? Is that joy? You know, it's kind of like it could be both, because you sitting on the beach, especially as someone who's a creative, you sitting on the beach could lead you to have more inspiration. And that inspiration could lead you to another book you didn't even know you wanted to write. And so I don't think it's always in the creative space, especially for creative people. If you're living like a very linear, my job is to be in the type of engineer that is very mathematical and I just need to do this every day. That's what the hustle grind culture is all about, right? And so what I'm proposing is an alternative to hustling and grinding and putting in all the effort and seeing that if we are all connected to this one mind, if there is a universal mind, which we've talked about where it's from, then that greater mind is the thing that is going to come through us and give us inspiration. But if we're so caught up in being this person who does this thing and have this specific schedule, we're not leaving any room for that mind to connect to us. And then the information kind of comes through us. You'll see a lot of musicians that say this. They'll say, I didn't even write that. Or people who write books. I didn't even write that book. I feel that way about this book. I wrote that book in like 3 months, and it was very quick, and I just came out of nowhere. And so sometimes we're in a culture about productivity, but we forget that creativity sometimes comes from inspiration. And when you are inspired by that mind, whatever you want to call it, by that unity, when you're connected to that, it's so wild because you don't need motivation because you're there. You already have the motivation because you feel connected to everything. And so it's ironic that people don't feel motivation because they feel so disconnected that they have to become and be this thing who achieves this one, who is this, this productive genius. But in creative endeavors, one of the most helpful things has been to let go and kind of let that mind come in. And, let's talk about examples because, again, I'm a practical guy. Albert Einstein actually is historically documented on going into hypnagogic states, going into lower brainwave states to receive information about how the universe works. That's the science that we base our lives on. He was doing this. So if the scientists are doing it, but yet, there's a lot of materialists that are not doing it now, why would we not want to at least try it? Before you go to bed, when you're waking up, trying to tap into those brainwave states that are in between, seeing what comes through. Some of my best ideas come through right in the morning, right when I'm waking up. Right when I'm going to bed. I actually have a notepad that's right next to my bed. I have a book light, amber, and it's not the name of the book light. That's the type of light. Okay, I don't name my book lights. But I've actually got it right here. And it's just so the LED doesn't mess with me when I'm like need to write something down.
Totally.
So like I get into those brainwave states. I actually put on these headphones. I lay down on my back and I just have ideas come in. And then I just kind of respond to the idea. Do I like it or do I not? And I'm not trying to generate ideas. I'm not thinking. That's what people think that I'm doing. But I'm not. I'm actually in the process of letting go. And then things come through. And so that's how the intelligence of the universe works through us. So I think the more people that start to practice and embody these practices to actually try to generate a connection back to what they originally were. Some people might say that's a higher self. Some people might say that's God. Some people might call it the creator. Some people are saying they're astral traveling. Whatever it might be that you're doing, I do think that there's a way to connect to that part of us that we have forgotten, and then that is going to give us an inspiration, because I think that part of us is helping us to evolve humanity. And it's actually a loving part of us that wants us to see the truth. But then we have this, I don't think it's necessarily bad, but the ego mechanisms want to be this individual. And that's kind of the polarization of this reality. It's like the ego wants to be the individual, and it came here and it is meant to be individualized because it's meant to keep us alive. But yet there's this part of us that we know, some call it soul, higher self again. It wants to connect to that greater version of love or unity or whatever it might be. And so these two are kind of like a battle a little bit in trying to figure out what that balance is. That's why I don't think it's necessarily, we're not trying to kill the ego. I don't think that it's something that most people are ever going to get rid of. There might be a few people that are completely divinely connected, and that's what we call true enlightenment. And they're not really saying much because there is no I to say anything outside of the I am presence, which is going back to panpsychism, the consciousness that is fundamental, which is awareness. So when I say consciousness is fundamental, what I mean by that is that awareness itself is fundamental. And I think that people mistake that as something that can't be pre-temporal or pre-spatial. And it can be something that exists beyond space and time. And so when you say, well, what am I outside the game? Because this is a question I get a lot. What is actually the player then? Who is the player? What is going on? And the player itself is literally awareness. That is the thing that is playing. Awareness. It's not anything that you can name, because if it's one thing, then there would have to be two things. Something to compare the subject and object to. It is the subject and the object all melded into one, or you could negate both and say that there is no subject or object. It just is awareness. Well, then that's kind of stating a subject. But so that's why it's paradoxical. It's beyond symbols. So that's who the player is, but everyone is that same player. Everyone is the awareness. That's why consciousness is fundamental, because some people call it being as well. That can also be a different way to look at it. It's like if you didn't have anything else, and if some people who go into deep meditations will understand this, if there's nothing that you are saying that you are, and you just drop all the stories of what's happening and everything else, if you just sit here, like right now, and you close your eyes and you're just like, what is there? What is present still beyond everything? And the thing that is present is awareness of the present moment. And think about how that could potentially be the thing that is the foundation of everything. So if you have people saying everything is energy, everything is alive, what if energy or chi is actually awareness, but there's different levels of awareness? And this is actually going back to the esoteric books. You have things like Hermeticism says this in some ways, and also Law of One also says this, that there's basically different levels of awareness, to where there's self-awareness. So humans, what separates humans from maybe other things like plants would be not that there's not awareness in the plant. It's alive in the sense that it has awareness, but it may not have self-awareness. Maybe it does. We can't say anything for sure. But when you hear people say everything is alive, to me, what that means is that consciousness is fundamental, which means awareness is fundamental. So if everything has awareness, then unity would just be all of that awareness put together. That's why you have enlightened masters saying, I am everything, or I am nothing, depending on the culture. Because some cultures might take the neti approach, is what it's called, which I am not that, which basically means I am no thing. But if you're no thing, that also means that you're probably something, paradoxically everything at once. That's why you have everything everywhere all at once. See, it comes back to it. See, there's truth in these other things. So yeah, it's interesting.
I love that. You touched upon it too, and I have to agree with just being human beings. We're so caught up in being human doings most of the time. And so for those, like you said, that might take the time, to get into meditative states or to just be. And that's where, as a creative, that's where I've come into some of the stuff that has worked for me, where, like you said, like, I'm not writing this, I'm not thinking this, I'm a conduit at this point, you know.
Hmm.
And there's something to be said about that. I'm so glad you brought up the example of Einstein, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, they're just the proposal that I'm making right now is that we don't need to work harder. We need to just understand how things work. And if we understand it, if we take the time to actually understand it, you don't need to basically wreck yourself in order to make it. Because here's the thing, is like you're saying, human doings. You want to know why? Because we're in a culture where we have to produce something in order to survive. And because if we don't, I mean, it's very tough. Some people are trying to make it that way where you don't. I don't necessarily agree. I don't think humanity is ready to be in a culture where everything is provided. I don't think we're morally and ethically at the precipice where there's not going to be the majority of people just taking advantage of things being provided for them. I do think that it's a nice idea, and maybe if we stick around long enough where we as a culture evolve way past where we are, and to basically move from I just want things to be handed to me to I understand the nature of reality and I want to provide, and yet I think that it would be possible. But the overall premise I'm making is that I don't think the design is bad. Where I don't think that we've seen in history where people try to make communism and stuff like that work, and it just morally humans didn't. It just doesn't work. We all we can do is look at history and see it never works. Why does it not work? Because humans aren't morally and ethically, they aren't there. The evolution of consciousness is not there to where it just becomes a thing that what we could call evil takes advantage of. So if somebody can name me a case so it works, great. Maybe in the smallest scenarios, it might work, but not for nations and that type of thing. So I'm not a proponent of things just being handed. I think that it is a level of personal responsibility that we do have to take. It does kind of suck to some respects because it is kind of, it's not like it's a perfect system. And there are some, because that's why I don't want people to think that I'm saying, I'm not trying to say it's a perfect system, but I do think that it is a system that requires us to step up, and it does help to get people to evolve. Now, of course, there again is some things that are really, really stupid about how that system works, which frustrate me as well. But I think that in the system that is designed for productivity, the summary of that was to say that the proposal I'm making is that when you understand how the universe works, you are doing what people call work smarter in a sense, because you're spiritually connecting, and that will allow you to see answers that are beyond linear answers, and not just see, but receive, because there is an intelligence that is guiding us. But if we think that we know how we should live everything from that smaller point of view, then we're never allowing that to come through. So, what does that look like practically? My mind says I should accomplish all these things today, but I kind of know in my soul, you could say, that I just need a break. I need to go out into nature. I need to go. This was me yesterday. I actually just want to go on a hike and let go for a second. Now, our culture would say you have to produce over and over, you have to commit. But if we actually go out into nature, I actually got some really beautiful ideas, inspiration. I feel recharged. And I guarantee you, by taking that time to let go and to connect to nature, which I believe is closer to our true nature, and I think the importance of going into nature cannot be overstated. When we connect to that, it gets us out of all the EMFs and all of this, and which is a whole nother conversation. But that Schumann resonance comes in, lowers our brainwave states, which brings us back to what we were just talking about.
Bingo.
And if our brainwave states are lowered, we can connect to that intelligence easier. And so if we're connecting to it easier, we're going to get the ideas just like Einstein did. And that will probably put us 5 days ahead, or maybe even 2 months ahead if we would have just kept pushing that day. So what I'm doing is proposing that you work non-linearly instead of trying to continue to do. You take a step back, connect, receive guidance, look at your intentions, because if your intentions are just to egotistically get things, you're not going to be able to connect. And they're going to wonder, why aren't you helping me get famous? It's like, because that's not the point. You're missing the point, is that the intelligence wants to help you to be more harmonious, but also help humanity. So that's when you become a conduit, like you're saying. It's a beautiful way to put it. You're becoming a conduit for that universal intelligence to come through and work through you. And I think that more and more people are doing this, because more and more people are being, to get back to what we were originally talking about, why is there a revival? Because this does have truth in it. And truth, I think, goes beyond words. It's actually something you can feel in your body. You can actually recognize it. And that's actually scientific, folks. We just keep going back because I can't help myself. It goes back to Dr. David Hawkins' work with kinesiology muscle testing, that if you are in the presence of truth, your body stays strong. That is scientifically documented. So there is a truth, and I think that truth is beginning to come out more and more. And as we given more time, if we can keep it together as a society, and we can stick around, if you know what I mean, which I think we will. It'll just be a matter of time before people see some of these principles on a more popularized level. But of course, there are going to be people that are going to try and manipulate that, and that's why I say go back to the original teachings. Go back, look yourself, do your own research, because you don't want to just learn from people who are telling you things. You want to go read it yourself, because you're never going to get the true message through even me. You're not, because I'm going to tell you it in my own interpretations. What you really want to do is go study these yourself. You don't want to look up to me. You don't want to look up to really anyone, because the power is within you. And if you continually go to those sources, I truly believe anyone can truly make it on another level, can truly level up. I might as well throw it in there, right? Can achieve that higher level on that spectrum, because it's not like you're better than once you achieve that higher level, because that's what people then associate. Well, I'm better than other people because I achieved this higher level. No, it's a spectrum. Just like if we look at the light spectrum, red might be over here, purple might be over here. If you want to get into purple, if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, what does that even mean? It means that the wavelengths they're closer together. So what does that mean? You're closer to unity. So when you're going towards a higher level of understanding, that just means that you're closer to unity, as a wave is when it reaches kind of that purple kind of end to what we know as the electromagnetic. So you're not better if you do so. You're just choosing to be closer to truth, which is, in my opinion, unity and interconnectedness with all things.
I absolutely love that, and can wholeheartedly resonate with that. It's just great, and I can't thank you enough. Where can folks find you on the internet, Nick?
Sure. So right now you can find me Nickzei, NICK.ZEI on Instagram. I don't really post on TikTok anymore, but maybe I'll get back into it. I'm on there as well. I make the same short form content, so you're going to find the same thing on either one. So you can find me there. Right now, so this is actually an interesting conversation, because it's maybe a little bit more nuanced than what you'd expect. I had my first YouTube channel, which was Nickzei. Okay. Then I really enjoyed doing the podcast. I changed it to Nickzei's Universe the Game. That channel is just for the podcast. So you can find me on my podcast, Nickzei's Universe the Game, on any usual the major podcast platforms and YouTube too. So now, as of the time of doing this, I am finally in the position where I can do what I wanted to do from the beginning. Because in the beginning, my first platform was YouTube, and I loved YouTube, but it was very tough for an up-and-coming creator to start on YouTube only. So then I had to go to all these other platforms. And oh baby, we're making our way home. I'm so glad to finally be able to do more curated, a little bit longer form videos on YouTube. So you will be able to find me if you're looking for what I would probably say is my longer form stuff, just me teaching. That's going to be on a channel literally just called Nick Zai. So I will send you the link tree, and literally everything will just be on the link tree, first channel, second channel. And so, yeah, if you go in the description, I'm sure, of this episode, you'll probably have the link tree and you can just find everything there. But yeah, thanks for having me on, man. This was a really interesting conversation. Hopefully not too many rants. I know I can get off on tangents, but I feel like maybe, hey, this is what the podcasts are about, right?
This is exactly what this podcast is about. It's about getting into the deep, literally. So, I mean, I encourage tangents. I encourage conversations. So that's why I can't thank you enough for your time, your space, your energy, and just all that you're doing, man. It really sincerely means a lot.
Great, man. I'm glad it hopefully helps you. My goal with all my content is to give people in a more empowered point of view, practically something that can hopefully help them in their daily life, not just like this esoteric, oh, this is cool to understand, but what can you actually do with it in your life? How does it actually impact you? How does it help you to connect to a sense of maybe love, even though the word is kind of cliche nowadays? Some sort of practical understanding. So yeah, try to do that everywhere. And I'm glad it's resonating with you, man. And I'm glad with what you're doing here. And people, if you're not subscribed, what are you doing? Subscribe to the podcast, okay? Click the red button. I don't even know if it's red anymore. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's white. Listen, click subscribe. You won't regret it. He's got a lot of amazing episodes. Check out the episodes below. I'm sure you have a playlist that'll be linked there. Let's go.
And there you have it. Nick told you what to do. So hit that subscribe button and be sure to hit that like button. Comment below. Let us know what you thought of this episode. I loved that conversation. You can find Nick on Instagram at nick.zai, and that's nick.zei. We've also got some links in the description below, so be sure to check it out. I would absolutely implore you to check out his podcast. And you can check out some of his newest YouTube videos that he's got going on, as well as check out his book. And like Nick said, and like I said before, we sure hope you subscribe to the channel, comment below, and let us know what you thought about this episode. Thanks for watching. Be sure to find us on Instagram at itd.jcosta. I'm absolutely loving this journey. So until next time, take care of one another and keep thinking for yourself.